Yes, sir, Senator Leahy.
Mr. Chairman, as one who has voted on every member currently in the Supreme Court and voted on many before the Supreme Court, beginning with Justice John Paul Stevens, and I voted for many Republican nominees as well as Democratic nominees. I have never seen anything quite like what we're seeing now. I've never seen such a politicization of the United States Supreme Court, something that's going to hurt every court in this country. As one, like so many others around this table, I've argued cases for federal courts, courts of appeals, trial court, as I have in our state courts. You always would look at the court. It made no difference whether it was a Republican appointed or a Democratic appointed judge. You knew that you're going to be treated fairly. But I worry that may be gone for the next generation, partly because of what we're doing here. I spoke on the floor earlier this week about what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg meant to the courts, what she meant to the struggle for equality for millions of Americans, and what she meant to me. She's just over 5 feet tall, but she was a giant of the law. She was also overwhelmingly good and kind. I know Marcel and I appreciated and cherished every time we'd be with her. And we're going to forever be in her debt. Now, there's no question it's the job of this committee to consider her replacement to the Supreme Court. I have presided as chairman over at least a couple Supreme Court nominations. But this is not the way we should do it. Not before she's even buried. And while the nation is mourning, not during such a polarizing time in our country, just 40 days from a presidential election, not at the expense of every precedent and principle this institution used to stand for. Not when doing so requires that half of the United States Senate go back on their word, contradicting every argument they made in 2016 about the American people needing a voice during an election year vacancy. Not when the president makes this a totally political thing, even announcing he will announce his nominee on Saturday because it gets good ratings. Saturday is the Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg has yet to be buried. I mean, this is saying, hey, I need political ratings. I could care less about the religious traditions of this country, the religious background of the deceased, but even just senses of morality and decency. And everyone in their hearts knows this is wrong. There are so many new excuses for the Republican Party head spinning about face, they're hard to keep track of. I've heard that there was an unspoken exception to the McConnell rule in 2016. Apparently, the American people do not get a voice when the White House and Senate are under control of the same party. Pay no attention to the fact that this contradicts everything Republicans claim to believe ad nauseum for 10 months in 2016. But even if this attempt at a fig leaf of institutional cover falls on its face, the majority leader's 2016 rule to let the American people decide only applies when there is a divided government. Then the unprecedented 10-month blockade of Judge Merrick Garland contradicted the confirmation of Justice Kennedy by a Democratic-controlled Senate during an election year in 1988 after Justice Kennedy had been nominated by a Republican president, and I voted for him. Republicans now also claim there's precedent for charging ahead 40 days before the election. Of course, there's precedent for filling certain election year vacancies. In many of the Supreme Court nominations during the first half of presidential election years, only one was denied any process or vote. Only one in the history of this country. Who was that one? Merrick Garland. You know, the 4 vacancies during the last half of election years, exactly 0 were filled before the election. The fact is, there's never been a confirmation process like this occurring just weeks before the election. Wouldn't it be fair to say to the American people, okay, you've got a Supreme Court nomination coming up in a vacancy. You have a presidential election in just a few weeks. Think of that as you elect. And then when the president, whoever it is inaugurated on January 20th, on January 21st, let that president nominate somebody to the Supreme Court. You know, some of the Republicans say it's because how we treated prior nominees of Republican presidents dating back to Judge Bork in 1987. I'm not going to litigate every perceived wrong, except to note that Judge Bork, who I had fully expected when I first met with him that I would vote for him, until he had, during his hearings, what I called a confirmation conversion. And apparently many others felt that way, because even though he had lost, did not carry our committee, our Judiciary Committee, he was still, by the Democratic-controlled Senate, was still allowed to vote on the Senate floor. There were some Democrats who voted for him, but there were so many Republicans who voted against him, he lost. If he'd had all the Republican votes, he would have won. And of course, every one of us knows that quietly, the president who had nominated him, Ronald Reagan, was trying to get him to withdraw his name. So the argument that Democrats are at fault here collapses under its own weight. Republicans made commitments not to fill election year vacancies that post-dated all of the Democrats' alleged wrongs. Another reason Republicans claim the committee needs to race to confirm a nominee is that otherwise the Supreme Court could end up in a 4-4 split decision involving a disputed election, resulting in a so-called constitutional crisis. I don't recall hearing this concern from any Republican when they kept the Supreme Court at 8 justices for more than a year during a presidential election as they blocked Judge Garland. In reality, in such a scenario, the Circuit Court decision would stand. That's not a constitutional crisis. And now the president's taking this argument to a truly disturbing level. He's explicitly suggesting he needs 9 justices seated before the election so the court will side with him when he inevitably claims election fraud. Election fraud? You know, I come from a state that's elected far more Republicans than Democrats. As a Republican governor, everybody in my state trusts our electoral system. But the president's rushing to fill this vacancy to ensure the court will toss out ballots to win him the election when he raises his usual baseless allegations of voter fraud. Yesterday, look what happened. The president even refused to promise a peaceful transfer of power until votes he wants tossed out are. There can be no doubt the president's counting on this nominee to help deliver him the White House from behind the bench. I've seen this done in other countries that we would not want to emulate, not here. That alone will result in a crisis of legitimacy for the court and possibly for the republic with unfathomable consequences. And all of this leads to one conclusion. Republicans are rushing with lightning speed to fill this vacancy because they have the power and votes to do so. Precedent, principle, be damned. But there is one principle that's always been recognized by both parties. And I recall being told this my first week in the Senate. by Republican leader Hugh Scott and Democratic leader Mike Mansfield. This institution, the U.S. Senate, only functions if we keep our word. It is a principle we should all cherish, and one that should not be disregarded so easily. When half the Senate decides that keeping our word is no longer important, we are truly in a dark place. We're headed to only darker places still, and the Senate is no longer able to claim to be the conscience of the nation. I say these things with a heavy heart. I'm saying it because I take seriously the fact of being the dean of the Senate, and I'm going to go back and discuss history. Our nation is divided. It's suffering from a pandemic that has taken more than 200,000 lives. The Senate could be the conscience of the nation. The Senate could work to heal the country and to respond to the pandemic, to save lives and help those who are struggling. But we're doing none of that. We're not voting on any COVID legislation, anything that could help our country. Instead, Republicans are using their majority to race to confirm a nominee that the president himself has told us will support stripping health care protections from Americans. Oral arguments in a Republican-led lawsuit to overturn the ACA and end protections for pre-existing conditions are just 1 week after the election. If all goes to plan, the nominee will be the deciding vote and finish from behind the bench what Republicans have failed to accomplish from the halls of Congress, resulting in millions of Americans in my state, your state, and every other state around here losing health care protections. I've been here 46 years. I know well these words will fall on deaf ears. But let me tell you, my fellow senators, I have many very good friends on both sides of the aisle. If you subvert Senate norms, and subverting those Senate norms and basic decency and fairness in the raw pursuit of power is deeply corrosive to this committee, to the Senate, to the Judiciary, to our very system of government. So it's simply too important for me to just shrug my shoulders and give up on this institution I revere, that I've been able to serve in for decades. So I urge my colleagues, change course. Thank you.